What if your rage is just your sadness wearing armor? You didn't come into this world angry. You arrived soft, open, wide-eyed. You learned rage, not from books, not from villains, but from the echo that answered your cries with silence, from the hands that held your body but not your feelings, from the moments you needed to speak and no one listened. This is how it begins, not as fire, but as ache. You tell someone you're tired. They tell you to be strong. You say you're hurt. They tell you to move on. You show a wound. They look away. And so you swallow it, again and again, until the ache hardens into something sharper, until the silence inside you screams for release. That's when the anger comes, not as violence, but as the only language your pain was allowed to learn. They see you now and say you're explosive, but they didn't see the years you whispered, and no one heard. They didn't see the nights you held yourself together so others wouldn't break. Your anger is not the problem. It's the proof that something inside you still wants to live, still wants to be known, still refuses to disappear. And maybe that's not something to fix. Maybe that's something to finally understand. Because what if your anger is not who you are, but who you had to become to survive what no one saw? What if the heat in your chest is just love, abandoned, unseen, aching to return home? And what if, beneath it all, you're still that soft, open, wide-eyed being, just waiting for someone, maybe even you, to say, I see you, I hear you. And you don't need to scream anymore. You learned early that some emotions were too loud for the world. Not because you were wrong to feel them, but because others were too afraid to hear them. So you began to edit yourself, quiet the voice, hold back the tears, tense the jaw, hide the tremble, bite the tongue. You became what they needed you to be, calm, agreeable, low maintenance, a person who never made others uncomfortable, a soul that apologized for existing too loudly. And at first it felt like survival, but over time it became a habit, and then a prison, a glass one. You could see life through it, touch others through it, but your real self, your truth, it was always on the other side of that transparent wall, smiling through gritted teeth, nodding while your insides begged to scream, saying, I'm fine, when what you meant was, I'm breaking and no one notices. You didn't fake it because you're weak. You faked it because you were told, silently, culturally, spiritually, that certain parts of you are dangerous, that if you express them, you'll be too much, unlovable, rejected, especially the anger. They told you anger is ugly, that it's a failure of character, that it's not spiritual, not mature, not right. But what if that's a lie? What if your anger was never the enemy, but a compass? What if it pointed to every moment you were silenced, every time your boundaries were crossed, your needs dismissed, your soul shamed into silence? What if the world wasn't ready to hear your truth? So it made you doubt that truth even existed. That's how the emotional muzzle forms, not with force, but with subtle conditioning. Don't make it about you. Let it go. Be grateful it wasn't worse. And you complied. You became the master of suppression, the emotional peacekeeper, the one who absorbs the chaos of others while hiding your own. But the body remembers, the psyche records, and the soul, she never forgets. She whispers in clenched fists, in restless nights, in the way your voice trembles when you finally dare to speak your truth. There's a silent theater we all perform in, a place where people praise your composure while ignoring your collapse. And inside that script, you became the perfect actor. So good at playing fine, you almost believed it yourself. Until one day, the mask cracks, the glass fogs, the fire that was quietly burning begins to rise, not to destroy, but to free. Because anger isn't chaos, it's clarity. It's the moment your spirit says, I can't pretend anymore. And yes, it's terrifying. Because when you've spent a lifetime being easy to love, speaking your truth feels like violence. But it's not. It's resurrection. It's the return of your full self, not just the parts that made others comfortable. So I'll ask you now, who are you? Beneath the smile that hides your storm, what's your truth? Beneath the silence they trained you to call peace. And when was the last time you let yourself feel? Not what's polite, but what's real. Because maybe the cage was never locked. Maybe it was made of everything you were afraid to lose, if you finally chose to be whole. If this spoke to something you've never put into words, let this be your moment. Drop the mask for a second. Tell me, what's the anger inside you really trying to say? What have you been holding in just to be okay for everyone else? You don't have to write it perfectly. Just write it honestly. This space was made for the voice you've been silencing. Somewhere between your first heartbreak and your first betrayal, you stopped expecting anyone to stay long enough to understand you. So you stopped explaining, stopped expressing, stopped hoping. But pain doesn't vanish just because we've grown quiet. It waits, it changes form, and often it returns as rage. Not because you're aggressive, but because you were never given a safe place to grieve. We are taught to mourn death, but not the living losses. The parent who was physically present but emotionally absent. The friend who only loved the easy version of you. The version of yourself you had to kill to be accepted. These are wounds that don't bleed on the outside, but inside, they fester, they build, they shape the way you breathe, speak, love, and even hope. And when no one lets you say, "This hurt me, this changed me, this broke something in me," what do you do with all that unsaid? You turn it inward, or you explode. Neither feels fair, neither feels safe, and both leave you lonelier than before. But the truth is, your anger is sacred. It carries the imprint of every moment you were not allowed to be whole. That time you were punished for crying. That time they rolled their eyes when you got emotional. That time you opened up and someone used it against you. It doesn't just disappear. It becomes a shadow, following you through relationships, decisions, self-worth. You second-guess your gut. You apologize when you're the one hurting. You mistrust joy because it always feels like the calm before another storm. And yet, you survive. Not just survive. You function, you laugh, you work, you smile. But beneath it, you ache. You ache in ways no one sees. You ache in the morning silence, in the pause between messages, in the smile you give when your heart is somewhere else entirely. And all that ache, all that silent collapse, becomes the storm you call anger. But maybe it's not destruction. Maybe it's self-respect. Maybe it's the part of you that finally refuses to keep bleeding for people who never learned how to love gently. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not punishment. It is a call, a teacher, a doorway. Your pain is not a curse, it's a mirror. It reflects where you were not met, where you needed presence and got performance, where you needed space and got silence. What you're feeling isn't too much. It's everything you weren't allowed to feel, all at once. And yes, it's overwhelming. But it's also honest. In a world obsessed with fixing, numbing, escaping, to feel this deeply is an act of courage. So allow it. Allow the anger to be the language of the parts that were never given words. Let it rise, not to lash out, but to lead in, to show you what still needs tending, still needs naming. The inner child who learned to be quiet, the teenager who made herself small, the adult who carries them both. They're not broken, they're waiting. Waiting for you to stop dismissing what the world refused to hear. This is not about blame, it's about permission. You are allowed to name the pain, to mourn what never got to be mourned, to say, yes, that mattered, yes, that scarred me, yes, I'm still healing. Because healing isn't polite, it's messy, it's loud, it's sacred, and sometimes it sounds like anger finally allowed to breathe, letting go. Two words that sound so gentle, and yet feel like dying. Because how do you let go of something that was never just an emotion, but a shield, a sword, a part of you that kept you alive? They tell you to release your anger, but no one ever taught you what to do with the pain underneath. So you hold on, not because you want to suffer, but because the fire is the only thing that made you feel real, the only thing that said, I exist, I was wronged, I matter. But here's the paradox. The more you carry that fire to be seen, the more it burns you from the inside. And there comes a moment, not a dramatic one, not loud, when your soul simply whispers, "It's time," not to deny the anger, not to shame it, but to thank it, and then set it down. Because anger, like pain, is a messenger. It was never meant to be a home. You've lived long enough inside the fortress. Now it's time to step outside, not defenseless, but whole. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means feeling fully and choosing freedom over control. It's like unclenching a fist that's been tight for years. At first it aches. Your hand doesn't even remember what open feels like. But slowly, there's blood again, warmth again, space. The same is true with your heart. You've armored it for so long, with silence, with sharp words, with distance. But what if you didn't need to fight anymore? What if the next chapter isn't about protection, but connection? Not with everyone, not all at once, but with yourself, with the part of you that still flinches when kindness feels too unfamiliar, with the part that fears peace because it was never safe enough to rest. You don't need to rush. You don't need to be healed. You only need to stop abandoning yourself in the name of survival. That's where real letting go begins. When you stop trying to manage the perception of others and start honoring the reality of your own soul, it's the moment you say, "Yes, I was angry. Yes, I had every right to be, but I am no longer building a home out of my pain." Because the pain gave you armor, but the healing gives you wings, and you deserve to move, to stretch beyond the narratives that made you small, to dance without checking who's watching, to speak without rehearsing, to feel without apologizing. Imagine that. Imagine living from the center of your being, not from reaction, but from resonance. That is freedom, not the kind that comes from detachment, but the kind that comes from embodiment. You are not above your anger. You are beyond needing it to prove your worth, because now you know your worth, not as theory, but as truth felt in your bones. You've survived the fire. Now it's time to become the light. And the moment you let go, not with force but with reverence, you'll notice something strange. You don't feel empty. You feel spacious, not lost, but found, not numb, but finally alive. There is a silence that breaks you, and a silence that heals you. One comes from being ignored. The other comes from being understood so deeply that no more words are needed. For so long, you've lived in the first kind, the silence of pretending, of being okay, of keeping the storm inside so no one would call you dramatic, too much, or broken. But now, after the fire has burned, after the grief has spoken, after the armor has been set down, you arrive here, not as a finished version of yourself, not as someone over it, but as someone who no longer wants to fight what's already true. You begin to surrender, not in defeat, but in recognition. Recognition that you are not your rage, not your past, not even your pain. You are the one who held all of it without ever giving up on becoming whole again. And maybe that's the real healing, not fixing what hurt you, but no longer letting it define your name. So you breathe, and in that breath, you finally meet the you that's been here all along, underneath the noise, beneath the stories, behind the roles you've played just to be loved. And in that meeting, you feel a stillness so deep it almost scares you, because you're used to the noise, the chase, the patterns, the chaos. But this is different. This silence is alive. It holds space for your grief without trying to solve it. It welcomes your fear without needing to analyze it. It sits beside your anger, not as judge, but as witness. And slowly, the war within you loses its momentum, not because you've won, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. You start to see that your pain never wanted revenge. It wanted presence. It wanted someone to sit with it without flinching, without rushing it away, without needing it to be prettier. That someone is you now, and that changes everything. Now, when anger rises, you listen. When sadness knocks, you open the door. When loneliness whispers, you don't turn away. You hold all of it like old friends returning home. Because you've learned presence is more powerful than control, and acceptance is the quiet miracle that makes space for every version of you. So no, this isn't a story about how you became better. It's a story about how you became real. And maybe that's all healing ever asks of us. To stop running, to sit down inside our own skin, to say, yes, this is me, even when it hurts, even when it's not who others expect, even when the world says, be less. You be more honest, more raw, more grounded in who you actually are when no one's grading your soul. And if someone still doesn't understand you, you let them go. Not from hate, but from peace. Because when you no longer need to be explained, you begin to be, fully, quietly, truthfully. And in that space, the real kind of silence enters. Not empty, not numb, but full, like the pause between waves, like the stillness of the earth after rain, like the soft hum of your heart finally beating without fear. So I'll leave you with this. If all this time, your anger was just your heart asking to be held, can you hold it now? Not to fix, not to erase, just to feel. Because maybe the last thing left to do is not fight, flee, or figure it all out, but simply stop, be here, and let this silence do what no scream ever could.